Hey, what's up, guys? I'm LQ. This is the LQ Review, and I'm here because I just saw X-Men Dark Phoenix, and I wanted to give my review on it. So, I hate to disappoint you guys, but I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon that this was a terrible movie. This was not a terrible movie. For some reason, it's become like the in thing to do to bash X-Men Dark Phoenix as some sort of train wreck. All right? This was not a train wreck. This was not a terrible movie. This was not the worst movie I've ever seen. I mean, it was just the exaggeration by about the quality of this movie by the online film fan community. It's astounding to me. Now, that being said, it's not particularly a good movie either. There's definitely some things that were good in it. There were some things that I thought were really well done. But for the most part, it just wasn't really that good of a movie. It was better than several X-Men movies, to be certain. But the X-Men movies has such a gamut of quality, such a gap between the quality. You know, the good X-Men movies, they are great X-Men movies. There are X-Men movies that are just flat out great movies. There are some X-Men movies that are bad movies. X-Men Origins Wolverine is a bad movie. X-Men The Last Stand is a bad movie. This one isn't anywhere near the quality of those in a good way. This is quite a bit better than those two movies. Um, but the problem is, here's one of the problems with this movie. It's a movie we've already seen. We've already seen The Dark Phoenix. X-Men 3, The Last Stand, was the Dark Phoenix story. And clearly there were differences. There were a lot of differences. It wasn't the same story, but it felt like the same story. I gotta tell you guys, it felt like the same story. And that was one of the big weaknesses of this movie, was that it felt like something we'd already seen before. That being said, I liked it better than The Last Stand. Now, I do think The Last Stand had a better storyline, in the sense that it had a better connective storyline. It connected points A to point B to point C, Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3, a little better than this movie did. This movie felt disjointed in a lot of ways, in the sense that a lot of the characters who came into this movie, especially Magneto, felt like they came into the movie out of a lot of coincidence and convenience, because the writer wanted Magneto to be in this movie. So they made sure they found a way to write him into this movie. That's what it felt like to me. Jennifer Lawrence had a very small role in this movie as Mystique. It felt like, well, we've got Jennifer Lawrence under contract for one more movie. She's not going to be in this one much, but let's go ahead and put her in because we got her under contract. It just, a lot of it felt forced. I gotta tell you, a lot of this movie felt forced. But there's a lot of stuff that I liked too. There really was. James McAvoy gives a great performance as Professor X. Just a great performance as Professor X. Nicholas Hoult. This is probably the most he's had to do in any of these movies. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he had a little bit more to do in First Class, but he had a lot to do in this movie. And he did a very good job as Beast, Hank McCoy. So the action sequences in this movie, there actually wasn't a lot of them. There actually wasn't a lot of action sequences, and I feel like that was a problem. But the action sequences that they did have were phenomenal. There's especially one at the end of the movie where kind of all of our X-Men decide that they make a decision to protect somebody. They make a decision to protect somebody and to stand up against Jessica Chastain's character. And the action sequence that follows is just really well done. It was a lot of eye candy there. So the action was phenomenal. Did Quicksilver get his classic scene? Kind of. They played with that in this movie, where he got a scene, but he didn't get his scene. So Yeah, there are some good action sequences in this movie. There's definitely some good strong moments, some good intense moments. The scene at the house that we've seen in the trailers, that scene actually reminded me a lot of The Last Stand for whatever reason. But the scene at the house was also a pretty intense scene. Um, yeah, the most intense scenes involved Jean Grey's character being evil, doing evil things, and throughout the course of the movie, we come to realize that she's not really evil. She just does some evil things because she's being manipulated. She's being manipulated either by Jessica Chastain's character, or she's being manipulated through her own power itself. There's a lot of, or in some cases, she's being manipulated by Professor X. They explore that again in this movie, and they explored that in Last Stand. Professor X manipulating her. So she's got a lot of manipulation, and she does some evil things. She also does some heroic things in this movie. Make no mistake, she does some heroic things in this movie, but a lot of the really tense scenes come because of Jean Grey's character. Now, one of the characters that hasn't gotten a lot of his due in some past movies, who got to shine in this movie, was Cyclops. Cyclops got to shine in this movie. They gave him a lot to do, and he used his powers really effectively in this movie. In some of past movies, Cyclops hasn't really had much to do because they really didn't know what to do with his powers. And in this movie, they knew what to do with Cyclops' powers, and he used them as a weapon. And it was a lot of fun to watch these powers on full display. So Cyclops had a lot to do, and this was the best incarnation of the Cyclops character I've ever seen, was in this movie. Michael Fassbender did a great job in this movie. I feel like they wrote Magneto in because they wanted to have him in there. I don't feel there's any compelling reason to have him in there. But again, he did a great job, and he was really the hardcore guy you want out of the Magneto character. When he joined the fight, you knew that it was time. Things were going to go down. So Michael Fassbender brought a lot of complexity to his character, and there was a lot of hidden rage, and there was a lot of honest caring for other mutants that he emoted throughout the course of this movie, which he's done that before. That's a Magneto character trait. Now, some of the bad stuff. Jessica Chastain, she played the main villain of the movie, and she was boring. She was a boring main villain. She was an alien, another world being, trying to conquer the world and trying to get the Phoenix Force to do it. She was boring. She was boring. And Jessica Chastain's a great actress. So I believe that she made the intentional decision to portray this character as kind of shallow and soulless and robotic and whatnot. But you couldn't have picked a more boring portrayal of a villain. This villain was boring, and whenever Jessica Chastain was on screen, I was usually bored. I usually couldn't wait for them to get to the next scene so we could actually get characters I was interested in. But this is probably where the biggest problem in the movie comes, and that's that I wasn't a fan of Sophie Turner's portrayal of Jean Grey. She, again, like Jessica Chastain's character, she played the character as not very emotive, unless she was having a breakdown. She hurt some people in this movie, and that causes her to have a bit of a mental breakdown. She cries. She has, how she wants to figure out how she can become good again, how she can stop hurting people, yada yada yada. But unless she's having a breakdown, she's pretty robotic. I didn't care for the portrayal of Jean Grey. It paled in comparison to Famke Janssen's portrayal in the original trilogy, and yeah, I wasn't a fan of her portrayal of this character. It just didn't feel like Jean Grey to me. So, and that's subjective. Maybe you thought it felt very much like Jean Grey, but not to me. It just didn't feel like Jean Grey at all, and I just wasn't a fan of the portrayal at all. The powers, the way they portrayed the powers, I like that. I could get behind that, but yeah, it didn't work for me. I mentioned how good James McAvoy was as Professor X, and I like that they continue to portray him as a flawed character, as a character who has a lot of shortcomings as a person. In this movie, they portray him as somebody who has some serious ego problems. He's putting people in danger to service his own ego. He's putting people in danger so he can continue to have relationships with the president and the White House. And when he loses those things hurt him. So I like the way they portray his character. I like the way that James McAvoy plays him. I like that we got to see laid back Professor X. I like that we also got suited up Professor X. So that was a very strong portrayal. The portrayals that I really had problems with, obviously, were your Sophie Turner and your Jessica Chastain. Just wasn't on board. And I like both of them as actresses. I think they're both very good actresses. Just wasn't on board with the roles they played in this movie. At the end of the day, it's not a bad movie. It's not good, but it really isn't bad. I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I took the time to say goodbye to these characters, because this is the last X-Men movie in this line of X-Men movies. Disney now owns the X-Men, and they're going to be incorporated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They will be recast, and they will be starting over with a new version of the X-Men. So this is the last time we'll ever see these X-Men on screen, and these X-Men are 19 years old. They date back to 2000. The first X-Men movie was in 2000. So this version of the X-Men is 19 years old. They've been around for half of my life. For half of my life, they've been around. So it was nice to be able to go watch this movie, say goodbye to these characters that I love. I love them so much. The X-Men kicked off this new age of comic book movies. We wouldn't have this new age of comic book movies. We wouldn't have the MCU if it wasn't for the X-Men. Many directors have gone on record, including Kevin Feige and oh gosh, the director of Iron Man 1, Happy Hogan. What is his name? You guys know who I'm talking about. They have gone on record saying that there would not be an MCU if the X-Men didn't come on in 2000 and prove that you can do comic book movies and you can do them well. So, yeah, there's been some bad X-Men movies. There's also been some great X-Men movies. Days of Future Past, Logan, X2, X-Men United. Great X-Men movies. Yeah, we've had some stinkers. This one probably falls somewhere in the bottom half of the middle. Not particularly good, but not a train wreck either. So that's where I'm at on it. It's worth seeing, especially if you like the other X-Men movies, but don't go in expecting something that's going to knock your socks off, because this is not a great movie. It's just a serviceable movie. So thank you for being here at the LQ Review, where we talk about all the geeky, nerdy stuff that we love to talk about. What was your take on Dark Phoenix? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Was it just okay? Are you kind of like me, where you think it was just okay? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for being here, and until next time, we'll see you later.